soil is like, there's no feeling like it. I'm sure you all feel it if you hear it like that. Once you've been away for a long time, you really start to appreciate what this land is. So on that note, I just want to take a moment to give thanks to the land that we find ourselves on and all the beings that call this land their body for hosting us tonight and allowing this beautiful gathering to happen here. And taking a moment to thank that which holds us and everything within us that guides us here, all the curiosities, the intrigues, the openings, and everything around us that guides us here in wellness, that we can be well and healthy and beautiful and flowering to find ourselves in such a good conversation. These are really good conversations. So my name is Lila Lieberman. I'm originally South African. I was living in Australia for 7 years and left 3 years ago. And what I'll do is I'll introduce myself briefly, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do through the evening. I also want to say that I'm really comfortable with the back and forth. If there's anything that's particularly alike for you as I'm talking and you want to ask a question, just put your hand up, and when there's a gap, I'll engage, because I want to know who I'm in the room with and what the interest is. So, my name is Lila, as I said. Originally I went, I'll take you chronologically through the journey. I went straight after high school to South America as an exchange student, and halfway through that it was beautiful, but it was quite conservative. So I decided rather let me go traveling. So I went up the coast, the Pan American coast, and found myself in Peru. And there I encountered various shamans, and one in particular who trained me in the art of using the cactus. I was 18 at the time. It was that beautiful gap between high school and university, so my mind was just ripe for something fresh. And I found myself learning about the plants. This was in the mid-90s, so it wasn't well frequented at that time, which was great because all the real healers were available and there. It was just starting to become of interest to the West. So I got trained in the use of the cactus, washuma. I went to the jungle. I took ayahuasca a couple of times with a really renowned master shaman that I only realized afterwards was so highly renowned because there were 4 of us in ceremony. And later through the years, of course, those ceremonies were really popular and crowded, but I was blessed to really have these intimate meetings with these real masters. And I came back, let me just say at that time as well, I also found and took refuge in Tibetan Buddhism, which is an important point to make because it was at that point that I realized that all these plants travel with teachings. And if we have such a powerful tool, we need to have a manual. So it's always useful to have a protocol and a way to operate by, as well as the tool that we use, and particularly when they're as powerful as strong psychedelics. So that was really useful for me to see, and Buddhism has since informed me and my worldview since then. I find it an amazing tool for understanding consciousness and everything else that occurs in consciousness has a map inside of Buddhism. So I came back to South Africa. As soon as I came back, I started being approached by Sangoma on the street. They would just see me and kind of make a beeline for me and let me know that I have a calling, which I didn't really know what that meant at the time. It was a bit overwhelming. I have a calling, I need to train. I left it at that for a while. I went to university. I came out with an honors degree in transpersonal psychology and philosophy, and soon after trained in integral coaching. And I started to move in the film industry, documentary films on sacred music and healing, and started to DJ as well. Eventually, as the years went on, I was working with a beautiful Zulu mother and daughter, Sangoma mother and daughter, and I did a lot of work with them. I was too averse to training at the time. Finally, if you have a calling to train, to initiate in Twasa, what we call Twasa in Sangoma tradition, and Twasa literally means to flower. If you have a calling in your being to flower, it doesn't just go away, it gets stronger. So I was trying to avoid it and do this and that to take the pressure off myself and do psychology and coaching and everything else that would allow this kind of capacity to flow. But that's not what life wanted of me. It needed me to initiate in the spirit way, not just be a mind doctor, but more of a spirit doctor. So eventually I found the right teacher, I found the right way. It was just laid in front of me, and I did my Twasa, and that started to really open things and bring everything together. What happened after the initiation of Twasa was that I started to spontaneously receive a body of knowledge that has been coming through ever since for the past 14 years, and that's called the 5 Pillars of Medicine. So I'll talk a little bit about that later, and how that feeds into the work that I do in psychedelic systems assisted therapy, how it's a map, how it informs the way that I navigate the world and life and consciousness, and how it can be used applicably across all spectrums. So before we go further, I'd really just love to know who is in the room, who am I sitting with, and just get a feel of what the interest is, so that I can tailor a talk to what's alive, as well as when anyone has a question. Who here is interested or already does facilitate these kind of psychedelic journeys? Okay, so quite a number of you. Who here is just interested, or let's say just interested in starting on the path of the plants and psychedelic explorations? No, for 1 or 2, great, okay, 3 or 4, 5. And who's here quite experienced in that regard? Obviously all the facilitators, but who else is quite knowledgeable? Okay, great. Great, and otherwise people are in the medical field. I know one is in the medical field, more medical practitioners. Beautiful. Alright, so I'll tailor the talk to what I imagine is in the room, but really just if something comes up, you're more than welcome to interject, and that will help me to include everything that's calling for to be met. So let me start by speaking. I've got a little map here to follow. Speaking about, after the Sangoma training and receiving the knowledge that started to come through and that's still coming through, eventually I did the training in psychedelic assisted therapy with a friend who's a psychoanalyst, and he did the MAPS training, and he just did a little initiation for 3 of us. I did it with a friend of mine who's a trauma therapist and a couple of others, and it was a really high quality, beautiful training. And then we started to work together in retreats and all manner of ways to broaden our knowledge and create a peer group to broaden our knowledge. So that was about 4 or 5 years ago. And as I was doing that, I started to realize, for me in my life, the 2 paths have been traveling parallel: the Western psychology and the Indigenous knowledge through South America and other places that I've traveled, and the initiation in Sangoma tradition, specifically a particular Shona lineage, even though I worked with the Tuzilis for such a long time. But I started to notice that there was a big paradigm leap with no real bridge across, linking Indigenous wisdom and how it fits into this amazing psychedelic work. So here you have people and traditions who've been doing this for thousands of years, using altered states and broadening our consciousness as a medicinal consult for thousands of years, and you have a new amazing field coming up with all the neuroscience and doing all the neurostudies without that legacy, without that age-old legacy, and there wasn't really much of a bridge between them. Now that conversation is a lot more mobile and there's a lot more momentum. But what I wanted to do in order to imbue the skills and techniques that I've learned in Indigenous cultures, as well as as what I've learned in Western psychology, to imbue that to psychedelic practitioners, people who are training, people who are blossoming in this training, to kind of give them more of a reference point as to how we can meet different aspects that are going to arise in these kind of expanded state consciousness experiences, because it's going to be more than just childhood trauma. It's going to be stuff that comes up around ancestry. Depending on what you're working with, there's going to be interdimensional elements. So you really want to be more equipped than just like psychoanalysis, So I designed this training, which I'll talk about at the end, and at some point in the next few months in South Africa, in Cape Town, I'll offer that training when I'm back in the spring or summer, and Mishka will let you know all about that. Also at the end, if you're interested in that or being on a mailing list about that, I'll give you my details and I'll just add your interest. So essentially, what I'm wanting to do with my work is really bridge these worlds and have a very wide spectrum, so that no matter what comes towards us as practitioners from the client, we're able to meet it. Whether it's ancestral, whether it's previous life stuff, if people have that in their paradigm, whether it's things around initiating and broadening the consciousness, what I call like accelerating the strata or the altitude of our perception, interdimensional stuff, and just of course being in pure consciousness itself. All of this maps onto the 5 pillars, which I'll circle back to at the end. Right now I'm going to talk about how the psychedelic assisted therapy works, and particularly I'm going to focus on MDMA because it's just a really niche and beautiful way of how we work with PTSD and trauma and dissociation. It's really beautiful in how it creates this neuroplasticity in the nervous system and rewires us. So particularly you can imagine when somebody's had impactful, we've all had impactful life is a school and we come here and we get impacted. for some more than others. And the nervous system reacts. It's this amazing, adaptable, intelligent system, and it reacts. And sometimes the way it reacts to protect us is to go into freeze, or fight, or flight. You've heard all these responses. And when it's really, really impactful, we get stuck there, because that's just what kept us safe. Completely dissociating, completely freezing, completely being on the run, completely being combative is what's kept us safe. So we stay in that mode. It's not a conscious decision. This happens in the reptilian brain, in the limbic system, in the gut of the amygdala. So people often can't make a conscious choice to get out of it. They need some actual maneuverability in a biological and physical way. And what I love so much about the MDMA is that it does exactly this. It works on the amygdala, which is a group of neurons at the base of the skull. We often call it a gland, but to be more specific, it's a group of neurons that governs the limbic system, it governs the reptilian brain, and it's charged with keeping us safe. It's all about keeping us alive, keeping us safe. So it's very binary and very simple. It sees the world in ones and zeros, safety or threat. It's just looking like that, and it's scanning the environment all the time. We don't realize it, but at the substrata of our consciousness, it's perceiving everything all the time. So if we suddenly heard a loud bang, our body would react before our mind is computed. That's the limbic system, that's the amygdala, that's its job, is continuously keeping us safe. As I say, when it's in a rest, it needs some help to gain plasticity once again. So what happens with MDMA in particular is that it floods the amygdala with serotonin, which is our feel-good neurotransmitter. And as I've moved through many years of this work, I've come to realize that the amygdala, I've come to call it the gatekeeper between the conscious and unconscious minds. It sits there like a gatekeeper, telling the conscious mind what isn't safe to surface in consciousness. Whether it's a thought or a somatic memory or an experience or a feeling, it's not only charged with keeping us safe from immediate physical threat, it's keeping us safe from anything associated with trauma or something that's too overwhelming. So we often have a cache file of content that's locked away. And the amygdala makes sure that it's locked away. And anytime it comes too close to the surface, the amygdala might push it down. And that can take a number of forms. Dissociation, addiction, zoning out, any kind of scrolling, any kind of way that we deal with overwhelm. And we're in a very overwhelming world at the moment, so we're all understandably seeking these ways to zone out at the moment. So what happens is that when the serotonin, the feel-good neurotransmitter, floods the amygdala, suddenly, from being this hyper-vigilant guard at the border of the conscious and conscious mind, it becomes way relaxed, and the window of tolerance is opened really wide. So anything that was ready in the cache file of the psyche, because the psyche is very intelligent, it knows what to metabolize and digest first. So even if we sedate the guard at the gate, the psyche will know what to present to the conscious mind in order of priority. So it's not completely sedated, it's not completely asleep. I have noticed when people, even under the influence of a really strong dose of MDMA, if something's too charged, the system will still go back into protection mode. But the window of tolerance is so relaxed that anything that is safe to come to the conscious mind can now come through, anything that's been kept down. So what's unique and amazing about this work and how it works biologically and on our neurology is that because the amygdala now is feeling good and safe, and the tolerance is widened, more content can reach the conscious mind. So anything that was charged or was really, labeled as traumatic and must stay out of you can now come to conscious awareness. Old memories surface, old emotions or physical pains that we've been storing emotional memories in can come to the surface. And usually they'll be very charged with trauma, but right now, because we're flooded with serotonin, we feel okay, even in the presence of that traumatic memory or sensation. And that's probably the first time that this experience of having this memory and associated discomfort come up is in the presence of feeling okay. Those two haven't been in the room together before. So a new neural association is made between having that memory, that awareness, being able to metabolize and digest that experience, as well as feeling okay. Now there's a new link, and literally, biologically, a new neural network, a new neural association starts to form between them. And that is the new neural network that we start to build on in the integration of this work. So really, I have to say at this point that the integration is key, and I always say to people in the initial consult before this work that I would call the medicine of this work the integration. The experience itself is amazing, and it stirs up the pond and it lets all the silt at the bottom come to the surface, come to conscious awareness. But how we then reorganize that pond and let it coagulate in a more optimal fashion, that's what I would call medicine. And that's in the integration, not in the experience itself. So it's really important how we catch that new consciousness emerging. And for that reason, I've called the bundle of tools that I put in my integration bundle, I've called it the amnion. Because in ancient Greece, the amnion was the basket, the woven basket that they would use to catch the amniotic fluid as the baby came on. So we're emerging this new realization, this new consciousness, and we really want to catch and integrate that really well. So there's all these beautiful tools, and all of that will be covered in the workshop, in the training. I just really want to stress that point, that how we integrate that is profoundly the medicine, because what we want to do is we want to normalize the healing in real time outside of the therapeutic window. We want to normalize that the mind can process and digest and dissolve at any given point. It doesn't have to be in a therapeutic setting. That's what we want to move our consciousness towards. We want to make ourselves, we want to optimize ourselves to be these self-healing vessels in a much more accelerated way, beyond just the therapy window. So, in a nutshell, that's how it works. How it works on the psychological level, as I say, is it really works in terms of how we tend to integrate. So, when I have a consult with somebody and I want them to really understand this work before they undertake to go through it, I explain to them, I give them a few metaphors so they can understand. And one of them is, it's like doing renovations. So we have this idea and we have this plan, and we map it out, and it's going to be great, and it's going to be more light and more space, and the floors are going to be different. Sounds fantastic, we're all excited. And then we start, and we're bashing down walls, and we're pulling up tiles, and it's loud, and it's dusty, and it's uncomfortable, and we can't walk there, and we might find something under the floorboard. We just remembered we hid there as a child. It's deeply uncomfortable. And it can be, let me say, it can be uncomfortable. So the work that we're going to do in this process is to sweep up, move the rubble, take things, the things that we forgot that we buried there, take them, go through that diary, do whatever burning ceremony we need to. However your being resonates with metabolizing its content is the process of integration. And that's why I call it the medicine. Like anything in medicine, in order to really heal, things often get worse before they get better. You go into a hospital for an operation, it's a great idea, you're going to do something, either put something in or take something out that's going to be way beneficial for you, but then you have to undergo the anesthesia and the cutting and the putting in and the crutches and the stitches and the recovery. It's not comfortable, even though it is for the better. So it's really useful for people to understand this before they undergo it, to come in eyes wide open and know afterwards to catch themselves with this tenderness and compassion in their discomfort. I had one client at the beginning when I was working, and she went really deep, and now she's a close friend, and she's just come so far, so beautifully. But there were a few months afterwards, and she was really in pain and struggling as she was seeing all these truths about herself, and it was so unsavory, and she couldn't really digest it. And she asked me, why did I do this? And what that led me to do is to make a letter to self. So before people undergo, they not only get the protocol, this is how you prepare yourself, this is how you buffer your system with these particular amino acids and vitamins and whatnot to just catch yourself, because it is quite a strong physiological process your body's digesting. Even though the derivative of this medicine is from a root bark of either camphor bark or the sassafras tree, wherever possible, it's still synthesized and allowed to get those alkaloids to such a strong concentration. The liver and the kidney have to digest that. Another thing to know, to catch ourselves, to be gentle, to be loving, to be kind and compassionate. Give yourself space and time to recover. Catch yourself with a nice amnion. It's really important to engage self-compassion in this work. So, I branched off from somewhere. What was I saying? I led it to self, exactly. So what I did, as well as sending people the protocol and awareness of how to prepare and how to make it more beautiful for yourself afterwards, and make a little cocoon and stay indoors for 2 days if you can, shop up beforehand, really be loving to yourself. I also had them write the letter to themselves, to their future self. So if they ever ask, why did I do that, they've dropped a pin at where they are now, so they can come back and remember. And then also track. So the questions are, proposed really metaphorically, to kind of get creative thinking around it. Where am I now? How would I describe in a metaphor where I am? And so you can really track 6 months down the line with the same questions where you came. What was the metaphor you started with? this kind of trapped cocoon, stuck underground in the cold winter and you can't move, to now a little sprout. It's a really beautiful way of catching yourself and tracking your own journey. So all of these little skills and tools are things that I really love to impart, because these are things that I've learned the hard way. There's a lot of things I've learned the hard way through this work. And I call those insights from the mat, or lessons from the mat, from sitting here next to the mat. And yeah, for people, we need a lot of hands on deck right now. The world is cracking and opening and sprouting in all interesting ways. We need a lot of hands on deck. And so people who are drawn to do this work and facilitating this kind of work, I really want to give them the accelerated injection of skills and tools from psychology as well as Indigenous, as well as things I've learned the hard way, which is why I've composed this training. I'm just going to touch on as well, I was speaking with my friend Steve before the talk about why now? Why is this kind of work now? Why are so many of us drawn to do this now? Why do we need all hands on deck now? And I always make an analogy to physical biology and what it's like on a cell, as above, so below. The same is true on the surface of the planet. So what we can see when an organism is under stress is that when something's really under stress and impacted, it undergoes a lot of change because it needs to find new ways of coping with this new stress. So what it starts to do on a biological level is it starts to send new instructions from the DNA. Under normal conditions, the DNA is getting certain instructions from the environment. Everything's normal, please produce these building blocks. The environment changes, there's an incredible amount of stress. We need to send new, all we do is just send new instructions to the DNA. Please, give us a new instruction. We need to deal with this in a new and fresh way. So that's called like firing new genomic sequences. The genome starts to produce new instructions. So what that does is it creates a whole lot of adaptability. And that kind of stress on the level of the cell or the level of the being is called hormesis. It's a kind of stress that makes us stronger. It's the kind of stress that, for example, when we go to the gym and we're doing weights and we're breaking our muscle, actually we think we're building muscle, but what we're doing at the gym is breaking muscle. When we go home afterwards is when we start to build muscle. So it's the same with this kind of psychedelic work. We're really breaking the old default network, the programming, the conditioning that's quite stuck in its ways, in order to, that's why it feels uncomfortable and challenging often, in order to come back with a stronger and more malleable and wider response. So the same thing is happening on the planet now. There's a huge amount of stress, and the planet is firing new genomic sequences, new instructions. Please deal with this in new ways. And I feel that things like the psychedelic renaissance, suddenly it's blossoming. When I came back from South America some 30 years ago, nobody knew anything about these plants, and suddenly in the last few decades, it's kitchen table conversation. Everybody understands. Most people understand, have heard of them or have tried it. So this attraction to the sudden opening, the sudden expansion, the sudden exploration of our consciousness, as well as things as autism or neurodivergence, I think is the planet's way of firing new genomic sequences. Try adapting this way. Look for a new way to respond. Experiment like this, and all these other ways of thinking. This, what we would call neurodivergent or autism or the spectrum, is, I feel, the planet's way of intelligently responding to challenge. It needs a fresh way to respond. It needs to break itself and then rebuild its strength. So as it's happening on the level of the cell when we go to the gym, or the level of the psyche when we're in psychedelic experiences, or the level of even on the digestive level, when we eat a lot of strong leafy greens, we think it's good for us, but it's good for us because they're powerful and they put stress on our system. So that forces our system to come back with a bit of, impact. How it happens is, with some of them, they start creating a lot of cell division. And when it's too much cell division, that's how the plant tells the animal to stop eating it. It emits a certain response in the body and a certain tannin and deflection, and the response in the body is, oh God, that doesn't feel nice anymore, or the body somehow knows that this is no longer beneficial. So what the body does in response is that it emits what's kind of a natural kind of chemo. It emits a signal for the body to stop that cell replication. So the green leafy veggies, they've got something in it that makes our cells replicate a lot, and when it's replicating too much, the body emits a miniature chemo, like stop that cell division now. So from the microhormesis all the way to the macrohormesis, there's this very intelligent way of responding to stress by building strength. And as I say, on the planet now, that's what's going on. We need new ways of thinking. We need new ways of perceiving. Like Einstein said, we can never build a a solution for something in the same state of consciousness that created it. So we're finding new and ancient timeless states of consciousness in order to deal with these situations. We're going back to our old ways of remembering that for thousands and thousands of years we would use altered states, whether it was through dance or trance or breathwork or plants, to take the contents of our perception, and I like to see it as like put it in a kaleidoscope with the same ingredients in a new way of seeing entirely, and then come back with that operating system. So, yeah, that's my understanding of where we are at the moment on the planet and why we need to tap into these ancient ways. I mean, it's in our umbilical cord of being humans, in our umbilical cord of our evolution, that we know that we can go into trance, and that trance is medicine, and that we can tap these deep states of medicine, as I say, from the umbilical cord of our consciousness to deal with the new circumstances on the planet. It's very important and it's very medicinal, and I believe it's very beneficial and going to see us through in a good way. So before I go on to looking at trauma and coping and dissociation, are there any questions about what I've just been speaking about? Okay, I'll carry on, and at the end we can have more of a conversation if there's anything in the room. So, as I was saying earlier, dissociation or shutting down, I really see that as a wisdom response of the nervous system. I think until now, until recently, we've been pathologizing that, but it's actually the most intelligent and most kind thing that a system can often do in order to cope with the impact that it's been under. So the nervous system coats itself, it goes into one of these responses, it goes into some kind of dissociation so that the overwhelming impact that we've been exposed to is no longer tethered to the ego. Because essentially what we want to do through this work is that we want to allow what's sitting in the cache file of the unconscious to become conscious while not overwhelming and drowning us. So we want to have that event alive in our awareness, but we want to live near the event, not with the event. So we don't have to keep coping from it. So what we're doing is we're kind of spacing out and re-choreographing our consciousness. I want to speak briefly about why this helps the body to, why this helps the physical body to heal. Because when we have impact that's too strong for us, that our mind can't deal with, other parts of ourselves start to help. So I noticed when I was in immense stress a few years ago, I'd had a big loss in my life, and at times, a death of my partner really, and at times it was too much for my mind to deal with. And so I noticed then it spilled over and my body started aching, like it was helping carry the load. And then when that was too much, it spilled over and my dreams started to chip in and help. So the being is very intelligent in how it staggers the weight of what it needs to carry. The body will often do us a huge favor by holding what we can't hold. Anything in its context makes perfect sense, even if somebody is a chain smoker. Sometimes in deep therapy, when people feel safe enough, they have said that cigarette is the only thing that kept them breathing in. Sometimes people don't want to let go of that pain because it's the last connection to that thing that they lost. So we really want to come to understanding and turn towards and validate and welcome what is the room. And this kind of medicine is very beautiful and very appropriate for that because it is acceptance medicine. And when we get to the end and I start to speak a little bit about the first pillar, the 5 pillars of medicine, acceptance medicine, the root of all medicine, is where we always start. We always start by saying yes to what's ever in the room. I had a beautiful experience once when I was running a training in recovery coaching. I had taken what I had learned in coaching and teamed up with somebody who had a recovery center, and we were running a recovery coaching course to see if it was more empowering than just the therapy in 12 steps, to see if people would accelerate or feel more empowered in their recovery by a coaching approach. And we'd have these sharing circles in the mornings. It's a hard place to be, recovery center. It's like going behind the scenes of psyche and seeing where people really go and where they're pushed into the cracks, really. And I remember one of the guys, it was a tough morning, everyone was having a hard time, and one of the guys, you can see he just didn't have the energy to put it into philosophy or kind of couch it in a nice way of saying. He just was like, I just want to take my life. And my collaborator, my colleague who I was running a course with, he'd been in this field for a long time, he'd been through recovery and addiction himself. And he was just like, yeah, I really get that. So what are you thinking? How can I help? And of course you can imagine the air kind of got sucked out of the room, because that's not a normal response. That's not what a rescuer or a helper does. But he met it in such a right way, and I just saw the relief flood across this guy's face, because it's probably the first time ever he's been able to say where he's authentically at and be met with a yes. Not with a no, don't do that, your life is so worthy, any kind of messaging that told him not only is where you're at not welcome, but it's also wrong. So what I really like to do, and I really like to engender in people if I do the trainings, is to turn towards whatever's there, turn towards it, welcome him, whatever's there, and to midwife the people that we're working with. Because the psyche is so intelligent, it knows exactly why it brought you to this session, it knows exactly why it brought you to this work. You don't have to consciously understand that. So my approach, as much as possible, and I've started to call it, instead of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, I just call it psychedelic-assisted presence, is to midwife what is presented. There's some baby that wants to be born, and you've just been called in as the midwife. Not necessarily the guide, although with time and with skill you'll learn when you need to step in a more directional way, when you need to step back and space is needed. But really to midwife what this being has come to entrust you with as they birth themselves. So it's a really useful way of looking at things, and a really useful way of regarding the psyche as not something to be pathologized, but something to really get curious about and welcome. I mean, there's so much information that a client doesn't even realize they're coming with. So when we turn towards and say yes to that, we can be informed by so many things there. So, that's where I was going. That how it helps heal the body is that our body will do us this great favor of storing a lot of information, and they may take many different symptoms like inflammation or disease or addiction or whatever it's doing. It takes an enormous amount of energy for the psyche to keep certain things out of awareness. It's like treading water all the time. There's overworking and hypervigilance and coping. And you know, when we push things down, that will look like inflammation or neural, like wearing down of the myelin sheaths around the neurons, so kind of neuropathy disorders and nerve discomfort. When we start to release the cash file that's waiting to be released, it's anti-inflammatory, psychologically and physically. So people start to notice that certain pains that they have are also leaving, because that pain has been a placeholder for what their psyche couldn't yet deal with. So that's another beautiful way of understanding this mind-body connection. Really is one thing. This is the canvas that reflects to us and mirrors to us what's going on in our consciousness. It mirrors to us the karma that we have incarnated with, and it's the canvas on which we can transmute and rewrite the story. So when we start to do this work, fatigue can leave. It releases a whole lot of energy because it takes so much energy to keep things suppressed. Pain, illness is all linked in this release of what's being held by the psyche, because it's one system. So when I start the training, the very first slide, I start with this one that just says psychoneuroimmunology, because it gives such credence to the acknowledgement from Western psychology, which has always been quite a binary system, Western hegemony, Western thinking, as if mind and body are two distinct things. And I remember that in studying philosophy in university. It was so, and having come in through Buddhism and understanding this oneness, and then all these questions about how do mind and body related, you know? And when we get really intuitive and we look at ourselves, it's obvious. It's just one continuum. It's one continuum. So it's like life is a school, and our body is the student. And it evolves and it gets all the lessons that it needs, and then we shed our body and all those lessons are released into the energy system of ourselves, and that will give rise to how we next need to incarnate. If that is a way that you like to think about it. But for me, that we would evolve through many different bodies makes perfect sense. We're evolving all the time. This is a school, and it's a very long journey. We have to reboot the body every now and then. So psychoneuroimmunology is really acknowledging that the psyche, the soul, the mind, has a direct impact on the nervous system and the reactivity and how we pose to protect ourselves from the world, and how that affects our immune system, how we that word because it's a powerful acknowledgement embedded in this beautiful word. Alright, so going back to the approach in this work of, ideally, from where I like to carry it, midwifery. This brings the attention to, if we want to be involved in this work and facilitating other people through this work and facilitating ourselves through this evolution, really the work is on ourselves and the quality of our own consciousness and the relationship with ourselves. The quality of the presence of the facilitator sets up the field in which the healing is happening. So all the work that a facilitator needs to do really is not so much in learning skills and tools and bodies of work and method. It's really about toning your own consciousness and the quality of your own presence. And in that field, the person in your presence, and when you're in this session, there's nothing more important than that person in front of you. They can just blossom. You know, attention itself, undiluted attention, is like gold dust. It's like pouring the best, most beautiful, mineralized, nutritious water on a plant, and then we just blossom. So it's not just the technique and the plant and the method, it's the quality of the state of the facilitator. And there's a beautiful quote that I like by Bill O'Brien about this. And he says, the outcome of an intervention has nothing to do with the skills or knowledge of the intervener. It has everything to do with the place within which the intervener comes. So all this work is really work about the self, you know, ways to tone and navigate the self as a facilitator. And that's a large part of the training, addressing how you support yourself as a facilitator, because this is big work, and it's deep work, and it's taxing work. We need to learn how to become session fit, how to become transmutation fit before we can sit and do client after client. You know, it's big work. You need to know how to pace yourself, you need to know how to tend yourself, and that's a huge journey for us, because even though we might really want to help, we might not realize how and where we've been neglecting ourselves. So it keeps turning the work back to the self and where to tend the self, and that itself is the medicine, because in that field, other people get that unconscious signal. It's a beautiful incentive to get us deep in our own path. And something I said as well in a recent course was, let me see if I can remember, I said something like, our job as facilitators is not to remind the client, it's just to create the conditions in which remembering is easy. You know, so it becomes more and more effortless, but the work is really on ourselves as facilitators. And what we start to notice is, look, the sessions itself, the medicine itself starts to teach us. There's so much we can learn in the training, but the clients being on the mat is really what will teach us. There's certain things that would never have been addressed, certain things that I know now that could never have been met through a course. Things like, if somebody has adrenal fatigue, best not work with them, or best to work with them very lightly, because we need petrol in our tank for this kind of journey. It's a deep and long journey, and we need some petrol in our tank. And what's happened when people burn out is very interesting and strange. And I've learned that thankfully only once the hard way. So you need to have the right questions in the screening and the intake form to know who's right to work with and who better not to work with, who to work with in different ways. So it's good to know the continuum, where you are, where your own capacity is at, and who you can work with. Some people are so beautifully built to work with deep trauma, refugees, Royal Commission, and others just aren't that resilient. So come to know who you are, and then you'll be the medicine for the right kind of people. Another thing I've learned on this journey is that, as I say, the journey itself, the experience itself teaches us. So I've come to call it the archaeology of the self, archaeology of consciousness. When we meet a client, depending on where they are, but usually if they're beginning this work, we're going to be working on the topsoil. The very first session, we're just tending the topsoil, we're moving some rocks away, we're seeing what's there, and the psyche metabolizes that in its own time. We never want to push people more, but we also don't want to give rise to catering to what's called the false floor, where they think they can deal with, but actually their capacity is a lot more. So learning to navigate where somebody is really resourced and where they're not resourced. What happens is we digest that, and then the very next session might be completely different. And what's happened is that you've hit a cavern, and now the archaeology of the psyche is comfortable to go a whole level deeper. And now we're in the underground cavern. up and down like that because that's what landscapes are like. But it's coming to understand ourselves as a landscape and understand how to navigate this terrain and how to trust the wisdom of the strata of our psyche dropping slowly as is appropriate for that client at that time. So, I'm going to start talking about working with plants. And even though I'm largely talking about MDMA and you can make these molecules, or all these molecules you can make in a lab, I always, wherever possible, like to work with a living presence of a plant. You're working with another living being here, and you've got something and someone to talk to. And depending on the comfort level of my clients, and usually it's tolerant, I will start the session with a prayer. Even though it's not officially ceremonial, we do want to invoke a certain quality of consciousness. If nothing else, just a quality of consciousness. So in that, we invoke that being that's doing us this huge favor of opening our psyche molecularly in this beautiful way. So working with these medicines over a long time, what I've also come to learn is that the plants too are midwives. And they want us to evolve. They want to birth us from one state to another. So often we need to go back again and again and just drop deeper and deeper, but eventually, my feeling is these plants want to crystallize our consciousness so that we can, the level and quality of our listening is more and more refined and more subtle, so that we can eventually hear and understand the communication of the tea plant, tobacco, cacao, mint. All of these are living, intelligent, amazing beings, and they all have wisdom. So I feel like the bigger plants are coming in like, talking about the archaeology of the psyche, they're coming in like, what do you call those, ground hammers that break the concrete, and they're...
Bulldozers.
Bulldozers, what might go?
Jackhammer.
Jackhammer, exactly, like a jackhammer. The big psychedelic ones are like a jackhammer to kind of open our psyche because of where we've come to in our culture. We've rigidified and come through centuries from which, of course, we're protecting ourselves from where we've just come. Wars and deviation of authority and manipulation of governments. Of course, we're trying to liberate ourselves, and that sprout will always push through the concrete. So now these big psychedelic plants come and they open our consciousness, and then we want to use that opening to refine our listening. Not only to the depth and the medicine of a plant, but the depth and the medicine of yourself and your clients. So that's why I like to refer to the plants as midwives, because they want us to move from state A to state B. Yeah.
Why? So why do you think plants on that? Do you think they have an agenda?
They have. Well, we're one thing. We're like different fingers of the same hand. The plant kingdom, the rock kingdom, crystal kingdom, the microbial kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the unseen kingdom. We're all emanations of the same life force. So why they have an agenda is because they have an interest in the health of the planet. And we, as these mobile plants that can tend and propagate them, we're brothers, we're siblings, they want us to be one. Just like the plant kingdom went through a great forgetting, and the animal kingdom was still well connected to spirit, we would want to help them. So I like to say that when we come into ceremonies, I like to joke that here we are talking about different plants and what happened in ceremony, and this plant is like that, and that plant's like that. They're having their own conferences, Lila took me, and I had this kind of, she took me. It's like they're also living intelligent beings, experiencing us as we're experiencing them. Yeah, so really it's about reactivating this primordial umbilical cord that we have to the center of ourselves. It's all a journey back home. No matter which way we choose to take it, it's all a journey back home. So we're midwifing ourselves, we're midwifing others, we're being midwifed by the plants, we're midwifing the plants by cultivating them and propagating them in certain ways. So it's all this big homecoming and awakening that I feel is happening. And this work can be a homecoming, really. That's what we want to guide it towards. We want people to come back to themselves and awaken in their own deepest medicine so that they can be the medicine they are for. So that's what we're doing for each other, mirroring. And as I say, there's no greater way to do that than to work on yourself, to tend to yourself. So I'll start to talk a little bit now about the training, why I made it, a little bit about the 5 pillars of medicine, and then I'll be very keen to hear if there's any questions or comments. I know there's a lot of wisdom in this room already. You're welcome to give information and not only ask things. If you've got something to add, I'm sure it's very valuable. As I said at the beginning, I started to notice this disconnect between the two paradigms of Western psychology and psychoanalysis, and then Indigenous cultures and more animist ways of engaging the world, and deep respect for living beings, and know-how, how to awaken and have consult with these living beings through ceremony. And all of that knowledge through Western, past few centuries in Western civilization, through uprooting us from our ancestral land and moving us to tax-paying cities, and how that's grown has uprooted us in more ways than one. And it taxed us a lot, we forfeited a lot. So Indigenous cultures, while they may not have the comfort and the luxury that more wealthy cultures have, if their culture is intact, that's a wealth that's immeasurable. To not know who you are in the universe, to not know where you came from and why you're here, is a massive trauma. It doesn't matter how many Amazon parcels will arrive 2 days later. To not know who you are is a way bigger trauma than to have, as impactful as colonization is, if you are intact with your culture and your knowledge and your lore and your cosmology, back to the beginning of time, there's no greater wealth than that being intact. So this awakening, the psychedelic awakening and emergence, this reaching into the wider span of ourselves to get this remembering of who we are, is this curiosity for that primordial remembering of self. And we wouldn't have this lunge towards exploring consciousness, our own consciousness, if it wasn't because we remember something timeless in that journey. We know that we need to go through some process to reactivate a timeless memory. And that's why it's fashionable, because the psyche is intelligent and it's attracted to things that, tell it where good medicine is. Right, so through noticing that disconnect is why I made this training. And as I said at the beginning, it's really important as we enter into this more expansive realm, and a realm that hasn't been part of the conversation in Western European psychology for many centuries. We need to widen the spectrum of how we engage ourselves and clients, and also the tools with which we meet them, because in this work we are no doubt going to encounter something that comes, as I said, from ancestry or from another dimension, or from, we need to be able to discern if a discomfort emerges, is it something from within us that's just wanting to purify, and we need to allow and midwife that out to resolve, or is it something external and we need to protect and midwife it in a completely different way? We need to be able to discern that. And the 5 pillars of medicine is a body of knowledge that started coming through after my twasa, soon after I completed graduation. And I didn't realize at the time it was going to be a lifelong download. The very first teaching was from a cedar tree. So that first branch, there's 5 branches, each have 5 points in them, is called the cedar teachings, and that taught me the allocations of medicine in a plant. But later, as time went, it told me the same is true of the animal kingdom. We have the same structure, and then slowly it showed me the same is true of the microcosm of the planet. It has the whole macro, same structure. The same is true as a cell. Same 5 principles running through. I'll tell you briefly what they were to make sense of it, and how the tree then explained to me why it's applicable in psychedelic circumstances. It said to me that the spirit of a plant lives in the sap. Medicine is in the bark. Power is in the leaves. Connectivity is in the roots. And love is in the fruit, in the flowers. It then went on to explain, I'm going to give you very entheogenic examples because you're familiar with these, but the same is true of the whole plant kingdom. So that's why ayahuasca is power, spirit, medicine, because it's the leaf and the bark and the sap inside the bark. That's why coca and chat and tea is power. You chew it and you can hike in high altitudes and power on and go for ages. That's why iboga is connectivity medicine. It's root bark, as is the sassafras bark that we use in DNA, which is why I say largely let's start here, this is the homecoming. It's connectivity medicine. Mycelium is pure connectivity. The example it gave for the sap was cacti, San Pedro, peyote, ceremonies in this plant field for a long time, that was the most common feedback. Is, oh, this is who I am. That's the one sentence that people said again and again after the cactus ceremony. Ah, this is who I am, because it's pure spirit. It's just the sap. The example again for the flower was marijuana. You get the love, you get a rush and then you come down. You get a high and then you come down. So if we think of coffee or cacao, anything sweet, fruity, you get a rush and then you come down. It's a sugar rush. So then the tree was telling me, okay, put these in practice, put it into your diet. You know, if clients come for more of the ancestral work, I was being shown they need to steam with this or drink that or wash with that. Now it's starting to make sense. Ah, this is why they need the flower and the bark and the root, because they're starting to make it a poetry for them. It made incredible sense. So I put it in my diet. I can now see if I want energy. If I want energy throughout the day, I'm going to drink leaves. Tea ceremonies. I'm working a lot with tea at the moment, with the tea, traditional tea ceremony from China and Taiwan, and the different kinds of tea that's all in the same leaf and the different places of fermentation and what they do in the body. So if I want to drive, I've got a long drive across the country, I'm going to drink tea and chai, and that's going to sustain me for a long time. We have the misconception that coffee gives us energy, but it gives us a rush and then a drop. So it started to get me to play with my diet and see how applicable these principles were. With time, I will show them the same is true in the animal kingdom. The spirit is in the sap, which is the blood. Power is in the leaves, which is the fascia, muscles, everything that exudes out and holds energy, including hair and nails. And in shamanic cultures, they know to braid the hair to keep it safe. There are a lot of power sits there. They call it like antenna. Medicine is in the bark, which is our skin, our GI tract, anywhere there's a membrane around the organ. This is where the immune system lives. This is a microbial field where the immune system lives, just like the bark of the tree. The fruit and the flower, the love, is our fruit and flower. Our offering, our work, our service, our dance, our children, our ceremony, what we do for a living, how fertile is our fruit, how delicious and nourishing is our fruit. Do we love what we're doing, or just spilling over, or do we dread going down that path and then our fruit is not very nourishing? So it's a beautiful metaphor by which to see ourselves. The connectivity is in the roots, which are the bones, the ancestry, the foundation, the structure. And the macrocosm of the planet, the same is true. The spirit is in the sap, which is the blood, which is the waters. The connectivity is in the roots, which are the bones, which is the entire rock and roll crystal kingdom. Power is in the leaves, which is our sinews, fascia, tendons, all the silica in our body that exudes out, and that is the plant kingdom as a whole. It's like on the macrocosm of the planet, it's like the leaf of the planet, that's where the power is. The immunity, the immune system of the planet, so let me just go back there, the skeletal system of the planet is like the rock and roll crystal kingdom. The nervous system of the planet, where the knowledge and strength sits, and intelligence and adaptability and mobility sits, that's the plant kingdom as a whole. The immune system of the planet, the microbial field, the soil, the skin, the bark, of course, is the soil. The love, the fruit and flower of the planet, just like is our art, our dance, our work, our service, our children, that's the animal kingdom as a whole. It's like we are the love of the planet. And we have gone through all of them. We have, that's all five. So this goes on, and that's the very first teaching. I'm just touching on that to lay the foundation, but really the kind of inspiration from the teachings that I bring into the training come from the later teachings. Not only do those five elements then become, well, this is what it looks like in medicine, in therapy. For example, the root, the bark, the root, the bones, the first pillar of medicine is acceptance medicine. It's just where you are in the world. We have to start there. And that's that connectivity medicine. And then from there, when we're suitably nourished, then we will sprout into the next realm of being like a leaf and gaining more knowledge and adaptability and power and rewiring the nervous system. So it all follows this immaculate order. Everything is following this immaculate order. There's two particular elements of this that I bring into the training. As if we were to go through the whole thing, you would see how it leads on, but I'm going to jump a few steps. The first is called the 5 streams of reality, in which I was told there are only 5 streams of reality, only 5 modes of consciousness through which we can perceive, only 5 threads that make up the fiber of reality. And they are time, space, level, dimension, and plane. Now in each of those is going to sit 5 of our channels of being, 5 channels through which we incarnate. So there will be in the realm of space is where, that's the root, the bones of the system. That's where our ancestry sits. That's what informs us on an ancestral level. In the realm of planes, that's where previous incarnation, where we build power, that's like where the leaves infuse us. Where we build personal power is through previous incarnations. We don't inherit power. Our father can be a very powerful person and the son can be weak and totally different personality. We build power through our previous incarnations, but we receive connectivity through our ancestry. The levels of our consciousness, the strata of our perception, the altitude of our perception, 2 people can be going through 2 very, one of the same thing and have 2 very different perceptions of it. That's because we have initiated our consciousness through various lifetimes. So those are the levels of consciousness, the dimensions. So beyond that, and that is things outside of us. Things that we encounter in realms that are more linked to DMT, psilocybin, we start to notice other dimensions. That's where we cross-pollinate. Each of these, of course, is linked with a part of the plant, a part of the body. Just in the interest of giving you the injection of where I want to go, I'm just shortening this here. And then, of course, there is source consciousness. That which is holding all, that which relates to the spirit and the self. So, the reason I introduced this in the training is because in our sessions, we are going to encounter things that are ancestral things that are not resolved yet. And we want to deal with that in an appropriate way. How we deal with things in the ancestry that need to be resolved in an appropriate way is different from psychoanalysis and how we deal with childhood trauma. If we're dealing with ancestry and we want to engage those deep, genuine resolve, we need to meet at the ceremony. No amount of talk can actually balance that debt, that ancestral debt, or tend to that ceremony of offering an acknowledgement that needs to be made to reconnect you to acknowledging that you have ancestors, because in Western culture, it's weird that we don't actually talk about that. You know? We're starting to now, but we don't acknowledge a lineage, a timeless lineage that we're carrying in our own blood. How we want to open that is through ceremony, not through talk therapy. So how we meet each of these channels in an appropriate way is really important to know in this kind of work. If we encounter something that's interdimensional, another energy or force that is disembodied but wants to engage with us, is it benevolent, is it not benevolent? We need to have certain skills and tools as to how to deal with that, how to engage that, how to protect ourselves first and foremost, because we're entering the unknown. You know, the ancestry and the past lives, those are beneath our skin, like the bones and the muscles. The skin is the interface, the protective realm, the levels of our intelligence, our discernment, the levels of how we've initiated our consciousness. That's the immune system of our being. And then we move to the realm beyond that, the fruit and the flower, which meet the air and engage with other kinds of beings, cross-pollinated by other kinds of beings. We start to meet other beings. So we want to deal with the interdimensional realm in a very different way to how we would deal with childhood trauma, how we would deal with ancestral, how we would deal with something unresolved from the past life. So I want to impart this very simple tool that really just sits in 5 channels and engage that and really empower practitioners to have a map. Really what I'm doing is bringing the 5 pillars of medicine into the training is to have a map, a really simple map. Another place that map takes shape in the training is that we work with the 5 intelligences. We all have these 5 intelligences, and some of us are stronger in certain than others. So what these are, and again, always relating back to the same simple map. You can always relate it back to that original map of the tree, of the body, of the earth. We have somatic intelligence. We have emotive intelligence, or nervous intelligence. We have cognitive intelligence. We have mythic intelligence. And we have spiritual intelligence. We have somatic intelligence, somatic therapy and attunement is really amazing work, and we really can find so much information by paying attention to the soul, to the body, what's going on there. We have information that's being fed to us from our nervous system and that reactivity. There's a lot of information there about how we reach into the world, how we react to the world. The cognitive, amazing, the realm of science, of medicine, of psychoanalysis, of understanding the physiology of all of this and tracking it. But that's just one way of medicine. That's just one intelligence. It's a very, very useful tool of intelligence, and it gives us a lot, but it's one intelligence. And then we have mythic intelligence, the realm of the soul, and the psyche, and what that image and that dream meant, and why that particular symbol means so much to you, or that mantra or chant, or etc. Why you went on a vision quest, why you did a drum journey, what came to you when you you saw something in your mind's eye and you just knew you were being guided. This is our mythic intelligence. And then of course our spiritual intelligence, where we distill it all. I would say of all the tools I've encountered, for that level of distillation, Vipassana meditation was incredible. It's like the purest teachings of Buddha and absolute science of the psyche and consciousness, and that's like how we can really activate a method to get to source undiluted consciousness. So in essence, I'm just touching on that, and I know it's a lot, and I just wanted to give practical example of how I'm braiding together the knowledge encountered in indigenous cultures and what I've encountered in Western psychology, and how they can sit together as a really useful map for practitioners that's beyond what I'm witnessing in the clinical training. I've had a lot of people in Australia. Most of the people in our trainings are those who have gone through the MAPS training, they've gone through the mindfulness training, and they come out of this fully fledged certified training in psychedelic assisted therapy, and they don't know what to do. So I just want to really give people the practical tools. So the training content will cover 3 areas, essentially the practical, the overview of everything, from how you make an intake form and screen people, how you make sure medications and medical conditions are suitable for this kind of medicine, and if psyche is suitable and ready, or do they need a longer lead up or another kind of therapy, all the way to the intake process, to how we couch that, how we care for that, the immersion itself, everything we need to know there, powerful tools like music, how do we craft that, years of DJing, those are informed, like how the psyche responds to music and the algorithm it follows, to the integration, as I said, that's the key, that's where medicine is. So the practical, all how to. And then of course the anecdotal, things I've learned the hard way, stories, insights from the map, and then the map itself of the 5 pillars. So people always have a reference point and an ongoing reference point as to where am I in the therapy, what kind of intelligence does this person have. Some people have a lot of mythic intelligence, very soulful, very dreamy, because they've taken refuge there, because life was so hard and their childhood was so traumatic. They have a high intelligence there and completely unaware that they've got a body. So where is that person's intelligence, and how do we slowly over time allow that energy to be freed up and massaged to be equal across all 5 intelligences? So really simple, really beautiful maps really is what I want to give people, as well as an ongoing group, ongoing peer reference group. So that mostly takes me to the end of what I'd like to say, and I want to hear what you guys have to say. And I want to end on a beautiful quote that I really like by James Hillman, who was a psychotherapist just 1 generation ago. And he said, people come to therapy really for a blessing. Not so much to fix what is broken, but to get what is broken blessed. And in that field itself, healing can happen naturally, can just blossom. Thank you so much for your beautiful attention. I'm really curious if there are any questions in the field. I hope that meant what you came here tonight, with the curiosity with which you came tonight. I hope it seeds and nourishes you in a good way.
Thank you, that was brilliant, and I'm so on in. But I'm really curious about how you approach, how explicit you are with a client about your approach, given that some people might be atheists and not believe in past lives, or how open are you with this potential journey that you might be taking someone on? Because I know that there can be resistance immediately. People think it's too woo-woo, or I love that you've learned it too, all the multiple. So yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, beautiful question. Thank you. Did you all hear that question?
She was asking it again in brief.
I'll make it succinct and repeat it. She's asking how I work with my worldview, really, in the presence of clients who might have a completely different worldview. They may be atheists, they may not want to engage anything that's seen as woo-woo. How do I engage them? So first of all, when I talk about sharing this map, I'm talking about in the training. I don't want anyone to take on anything that doesn't resonate with them, because as I said, we need to be in harmony and resonance with the medicine of who we are. So if that doesn't make sense to you, that we're like a billion-year-old being and carry blood that's poured from vessel to vessel, and we have all that wisdom, do your thing. I'm going to trust you. That's for practitioners in the field. When I'm working with clients, I meet whole methodology. All I do is I show up as a midwife. Who have we got here? What's the nature of the birth? What do we do? And if I feel like once or twice I felt like people are uncomfortable with prayer, I make it really, my prayer is non-denominational anyway. I'm calling on the elements, the directions, things that I find intelligent, the ground beneath me, the spirit within me. And if they're uncomfortable with that, then, it's a very grounded, non-denominational prayer. Most people resonate with that, and I've noticed even the most stalwart kind of corporate, literal reductionist people, slowly with time really enjoy that, because the second, third session, I'll ask them, would you like me to open with prayer? Expecting, the first time they were practicing. No, they really like it. And eventually now, the clients I've worked with a long time, I say, would you like to do the prayer? And I love that because it's like this journey of empowering them. They don't want to pray, and it's fantastic. That's fine. I'm here for them, meeting them where they are. So it's quite comfortable because that's truly beautiful. Thank you for that.
Just develop, what if something happens in the ceremony, let's say you feel there's an entity in the room, or they might feel that they have an entity, how do you deal with that? Like, how just about
comments on that. I was about to say that happened to me yesterday. I had somebody's ancestor come through, and she specifically said before the journey that she was like, no ancestral stuff, no weird things. I just want our journey. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. But I was like, let's go with that. And then this ancestor was like banging on the door, like pushing me and saying, you can't not tell her, you have to tell her I'm here. And I actually had to do it. I was just like, hey, tell me a little bit about your grandpa. And then the thing is that moment took the journey from her having this very big wall of like, I'm okay, and she wasn't going deep, and I was like, that's okay, we're in that space. And then this grandpa came, and he fucking opened it up, and it was incredible. And she was so happy that he did, but it was really that. So when you were talking about like, people and their beliefs and not wanting to go, I was like, yes.
Yeah. So the wisdom of how you met that was that you got with her belief system. You didn't say, I have your grandpa knocking. You said, tell me about your grandpa. Or you can embrace it in a way that gets with her.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to know why you didn't want ancestral,
Oh yeah, we knew why.
Yeah.
We knew why she was pushing it away when he came. Because
Yeah.
it was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So how you use the question, you really midwife that, you loosen it. And then always that wisdom happens. And often I've noticed in ceremony, which is a very different field of therapy, having held cactus ceremony, and then the therapy is a very different field, which is why I want to offer this wide spectrum. Different tools, I mean, each of them, depending on what plant you're working in. Sometimes it's not. Somebody will think, it's not working, I need more medicine, I need more medicine, I need more medicine. And what they really need is the right question. It's like an acupuncture needle in the psyche that opens the floodgate that needs to. So yeah, and you asked in the right way. So that's okay. Yeah. Did that
This is great, perfect, the field answers.
So at this point, sometimes I stop the recording so we can all speak openly and freely.
Yeah, okay.
Is that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.